Man, going back to this game made me feel really old. This game originally came out way back in 2002. I was still a twerp back then. I miss my youth. I actually still have my copy of it, though I can't recall if this is the original copy I got, or if my copy was brand new, as this one was used from the local video store. Anyway, I recently picked up the Kingdom Hearts All-in-One bundle from PSN, since it had a 25% discount at the time, and I figured, hey, that's around the price of a deluxe edition of one game. This comes with pretty much the whole series, albeit with some games edited down into movies. So, I figured, why not? First, I am not what you'd call a fan of the franchise. I remember enjoying this first entry, hating Chain of Memories, and being lukewarm on the second game. But I went back through this game and its 1.5 Final Remix Super Turbo Championship HD Remastered Tournament Edition, and I will be comparing it to my memories, for better or worse. Obviously, my original copy was just the base North American version for the PS2, while this has all of them fancy upgrades from the Final Mix, plus some goodies added in the remaster. And of course, it has been years since I last played the game, as I hadn't really played it recently, even on my old PS3 with backwards compatibility before it died on me. That being said, the game did feel pretty familiar even after all this time. So, let's find out if Kingdom Hearts lives up to its hype, or if it's just a pretender to the crown. Okay, so first things first, I just want to point out that there's probably going to be spoilers. Granted, the game came out in 2002, so the statute of limitations is gone in my opinion, but I'll still try to keep the spoilers to a minimum. So if you're just looking for a direct review, you'd probably best go somewhere else. Now that that's out of the way, I'm going to mention something here. Normally I lead off with a bit of plot or a bit about the graphics, but screw that, listen to that amazing soundtrack! Sorry, I couldn't control myself because, the music is so good! Yoko Shimomura was at the top of her game with this, game. Regardless of what else I say about this franchise, know this, I would gleefully murder in defense of this soundtrack. Just ask Steve. Oh right, you can't, because I murdered him when he talked crap about this soundtrack. Steve is dead! Jokes aside, the soundtrack is really fantastic. Whether it's Dearly Beloved, the orchestral version of Simple and Clean, or really any track in the game, it sounds so good. I can't think of a single track I dislike. The music was also reorchestrated for the remaster, and I won't lie, I honestly didn't hear a lot of difference. I think it's due to the original compositions already sounding so good, but I also haven't listened to much of the redone music by itself, so maybe that's why. Either way, the music was always great, and the remaster is no different. Okay, so as soon as you hit start, you're struck with exactly what you'd expect from a Square title from the PS2 era. A fancy-ass full-motion video! Yeah! Well, the CGI is honestly still good. Great, even. But the FMVs look pretty blatantly upscaled. I guess they didn't keep the originals on hand or something, but they definitely look a bit worse than I was expecting quality-wise. Not a big deal, HD remaster or not, you'd expect a fair bit of PS2 era aspects. You know what? That's A-okay with me. Utada Hikaru's Simple and Clean is still so damn catchy, whether it's this energetic remix the game starts with, or the calm version from the ending, Japanese or English, which I'm not going to use because I don't want to get copyright striked. After the trippy opening sequence, we take control of Sora and his weird face. Seriously, I know I'm picking on a PS2 game for the most part, but his in-game model face looks really weird compared to his cutscene model face, and it looked weird back when I was a kid. He looks like a dumb cat. There's actually a lot of wonky faces in the game, and as much as I noticed it back then, it's even more noticeable now. And it's something that persists in each of the entries I've played up to the time of this writing. Still, faces aside, not all of them look ridiculous, and the cutscene models are still wonderfully expressive in their animation, and when it's not a cutscene, the game looks pretty damn good for its age. The locations still have that simplistic look to them, and I mean that as a compliment. It really does feel like details are only used where they need to be, and everything else has a more basic style to it, which helps make it look more cartoonish like the Disney movies it often draws from. Also, something I absolutely have to note regarding this remaster. The PlayStation 4 version brings it all up to a 60 frames per second performance. Well, mostly. A lot of the cutscenes and some of the animations still go at 30, but I imagine that's due to internal timing and such. From what I've heard, the initial Japanese release had some bugs due to this, but they seem to have been polished out since then. I think the only real bug I can recall off the top of my head was getting stuck on the stairs in Halloween Town, and that was one that may have existed in the original for all I know. Still, it's nice to have it at the silky smooth frame rate during gameplay, but I'd be lying if it was a game changer. Honestly, other than looking nice, the game feels pretty much the same as I remembered it. Except a little more difficult, strangely, but I'll get to that later. One of the interesting aspects here is you actually kinda get to pick your build. You're given a choice of using a sword, shield, or staff, and each one affects your growth, and then you're told to sacrifice one. So, picking up the sword and giving up the shield means you'll be a powerful glass cannon, learning primarily aggressive attack skills with middling magic quickly, and defensive support skills at a slower rate, or something to that effect. You're also given some questions that affect how fast you level up. Afterwards, you fight a bunch of little shadow things called Heartless, and then you fight the big papa of them, and he's got some fancy dreadlocks with him. After a pretty easy battle, Sora is woken up by his friend Kairi, who calls him lazy, and their mutual friend Riku says they're both lazy. As it turns out, the three of them want to go on an adventure on a boat to find other worlds, but first they gotta build a raft and prepare for the trip. The game's first 2 days are pretty much focused on these actions, though it does give some pleasant side distractions, such as beating the crap out of the other kids. This brings one of the first notable things about this Disney Square crossover: characters from the Final Fantasy series. Here we get to pal around with Tidus, Wakka, and Selphie, and by pal around I mean beat them up for experience points. You can also fight all three at the same time, which is a good way to getting acclimated to the game's combat system, along with challenging Riku to a duel. Really, the combat isn't too difficult for the most part. You don't have a ton of options: X to smack them, circle to jump, square to block when standing, or dodge roll when moving. You get more abilities, such as the capacity to cast magic and glide, etc., but the core remains the same. What really works is that despite having a command menu in combat, it's not a major necessity. Not only can you assign a few spells or items to your shortcuts, the game is just simple on its accessibility. Magic is fairly decent and is mixed with different types. Blizzard is a shotgun blast, fire is a direct blast that is easily changed into a rapid burst, thunder is an area of effect, arrow gives you a barrier to keep you from dying, that kind of thing. Summons exist? I didn't really use them much beyond Tinkerbell, who regenerates your health over time. Though I seem to remember Dumbo making MP bubbles drop quite a bit, and the rest I believe are just damage dealers and weren't particularly useful. I gotta admit, the combat is a little bit stiff. There's a fair bit of jank to it, and while it's never outright bad, Sora can feel a bit on the heavy side. There's definitely a few times where it felt like forever before I could recover from a combo, or even just from jumping, and there is perhaps an over-reliance on air combat later in the game. Worse yet, your AI partners are pretty dumb. They'll get smacked constantly, waste your inventory if you equip them with items frequently, and often just wind up being dead weight. Thankfully, they do a decent job of keeping your health up, since they do recognize when you're getting low on HP or MP, and occasionally may toss an arrow barrier at you from time to time. Back in the plot, we see that Donald and Goofy are preparing to go search for the missing King Mickey Mouse. That's a thing I just said! Who has gone missing in an attempt to find out why the different worlds keep disappearing. And I'm gonna touch upon something else here. The voice acting. Honestly, it's mostly good. Occasionally you get a deadpan delivery, most often from Riku and Squall.
That's Leon.
Got it, Lightning. It's not even that they're played by bad actors, just something about their delivery in this game is off. The Disney cast mostly sound great. I'd say the majority of them sound either close to their animated selves, if they aren't straight up played by the respective actors. There's a few odd ones out, like the genie being voiced by Homer Simpson instead of the late great Robin Williams. But few that I'd say are outright bad, and the worst ones tend to only have 1 or 2 lines. Despite Riku being a bit deadpan at times, Sora and Kairi both sound pretty good. The main antagonist, Ansem, sounds awesome, and I'm super salty Billy Zane was not brought back for the sequels. Darkness! And Donald and Goofy just sound so perfect. Especially Goofy.
That's one funny face.
Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in the plot, during the second day, you're introduced to your arch-nemesis. No, not him. Well, I mean, he's there too, but I'm actually talking about the game's camera. Holy crap, the camera is much worse than I remembered. It's not that it's particularly unruly or that it's difficult to use. Rather, I feel like it's zoomed in too much. And don't bother trying to use the manual camera. When trying to do the race with Riku, the camera movement was so slow, I'm pretty sure Sonic 06's load screens are faster, and I could not for the life of me see where I was going. Worse yet, it does nothing to help with the distance issue. Still, there were times where I couldn't see particular things because larger characters like Goofy or Beast would cover up where I was trying to look. It was especially aggravating when trying to figure out what animation the little mushroom guys were going through so I could cast the proper spell on them. Even worse, there's times where just moving around would be difficult, as the zoomed-in camera would go right up the aforementioned characters' asses. Still, it's not the most offensive camera I've ever seen. The second day comes to a close and a storm hits, prompting our trio of idiots to go to the island to protect the raft. By the way, don't expect to ever hear anything about Sora's parents ever again. There's maybe this time and one other time in, I think, Birth by Sleep. Apparently they don't matter. By the time Sora gets there, it's overrun with the Heartless, so I guess they're a natural disaster now. Anyway, Sora can't smack the Heartless with his wooden sword, even though everyone else can use normal weapons, so you just gotta run around until you come across Riku, who decides now would be a good time to give himself to the darkness. Expect to hear a lot about Riku and the word darkness in this series. There is an abundance of it. Sora gets his fancy Keyblade from the tutorial, Kairi spaces out like a zombie and disappears, and Sora finds himself fighting the Dreadlock thing again before waking up in Traverse Town. As you wander around the town, Is that Sid? Holy crap, that's Sid Highwind! Sorry, I got distracted by him and his hilarious giant barrel belt. As I was saying, as you wander around the town, It's Squall!
That's Leon.
Got it, Cecil. Cool seeing... Oh, he kicked my ass. So before you can wander around the town, Aerith and Yuffie? Holy crap, that's Aerith and Yuffie! Sorry about that, but even now, it's still a treat seeing those familiar Final Fantasy faces, even if they're basically glorified cameos. Admittedly, this is around the time that in-game model faces become distracting during cutscenes. A friend of mine refers to them as fish faces. And yeah, it fits. Anyway, Sora finally meets up with Donald and Goofy, who were sent to find the wielder of the Keyblade, and since that's Sora, the three of them go on an adventure to stop the Heartless. Doing this means going to various Disney worlds in search of the keyholes that Sora will need to close, as well as trying to find Riku, Kairi, and the King. And by Disney worlds, I mean actual worlds inspired by the various Disney flicks, which is undeniably awesome. I hadn't even seen like half of these movies when this game came out, and that aspect still kind of came off as appealing. From here, you go to each world, fulfill a basic objective of meet the hero of that world, beat up some Heartless, fight a boss, seal the keyhole, rinse and repeat. The stories of the Disney worlds are pretty bare bones, often being retellings of the movies, and then at the end trying to partially tie it into the main plot of the game. There are, however, some that tell their own stories, and these are usually the stronger ones. Now, admittedly, I could be wrong on that, as I haven't seen most of these movies in a long time, if I've seen them at all. I legitimately never saw Alice in Wonderland until a few years ago, and yes, this does make me a horrible person. However, I do appreciate that they attempt to tie most of these worlds into the main plot with the Princesses of Heart and this Legion of Doom knockoff with Disney villains instead of the worlds just kind of being there for the sake of being there. Going to and from each world requires the use of the Gummy Ship, a customizable little shuttle that flies you through some simplistic shoot-'em-up stages. As a kid, I hated these so much, and was so happy when I got the Warp Gummy that allowed me to skip the sections I had already cleared. Thing is, I didn't hate it this time. In fact, I had a blast with it. Maybe it's because now I actually understood how to customize my ship, but I wasted quite a bit of time making a massive flying wall of destruction for funsies. The gummy areas are mostly short and they're fairly easy, even without a properly upgraded ship. I don't even think they've changed in all this time, so it might just be a me thing. A few worlds change it up, such as Olympus Coliseum having Oh my god, it's Cloud! Okay, putting that aside, this was probably the biggest reason why I, and a lot of people, wanted this game so bad. Seeing Final Fantasy VII's lead protagonist as a voiced character was amazing, and I believe this was the first time he was voiced in English. And of course, he beat the crap out of most of us because he's Cloud Strife. Similarly to Squall,
That's Leon.
Right, sorry about that, Bartz. Anyway, similarly, losing to either one of these characters doesn't count as a death. They honestly expect you to get your ass handed to you. If you're skilled enough, or over-leveled enough, you can beat both of them, but I like that they threw in some challenging opponents early on. Even better, after you clear the tournament, you can come back at different points in the game to do more tournaments. Each one has unique boss encounters, like a rematch against Cloud, or you can wind up fighting them paired up with others like Yuffie. And of course there's the famous bonus boss fight against Sephiroth, who's a damn good test of your skill. Another world that changes it up is Atlantica, which wasn't so bad according to my memory, until I got the Dolphin Kick ability. It was here where the game became aggravating, due to control wonk. For some reason, they thought it was a good idea to attach the ability, which acts like an underwater dash, to the same buttons that control your ability to move up and down in the water. It got aggravating just trying to go up and instead flying face first into an enemy attack, and you pretty much need the ability against the boss fight with Ursula. There's also the 100 Acre Wood, which is a bunch of simple minigames. Damn it, Pooh! Why are you so charming? Wait, what's a Pooh stick? Maybe you're not so charming! Speaking of boss fights, it's here that I'm gonna bring up the difficulty. Back when I was a kid, I remember dying in just a few specific places in the main story. During the boss battle in Agrabah, the second major battle against Riku, and of course during the second phase boss fight with Ansem. This time, I swear I died a lot in general, not just against bosses. I'd estimate I got clobbered more than a half dozen times, and even then there were situations where I got by on just the skin of my ass. Maybe it's because I just wasn't sufficiently leveled a lot of the time, as I did have to go back and do some side content before I could manage to beat the final boss, but I swear the game had a sharp difficulty increase that didn't exist in the original. Mind you, I was playing on Standard. It's not like I was leaping at the game's proud mode or anything, yet the last part of the game felt pretty rough. Most of this wasn't too bad, except during a part where you have to slaughter like a bajillion enemies while waiting for a door to open in the final area. While I somehow managed to not get my ass kicked there, the whole sequence felt like it was dragging its ass, and I almost did die several times. Maybe I'm just getting old, or maybe I overleveled back in the day, but I swear the challenge was increased several times over from the original. Not that that's a bad thing, mind you. A bit of difficulty is perfectly fine, though a few of those parts felt harder than I would expect from a game that was aimed at really younger audience. Something else I'd like to quickly mention, the environmental puzzles. These aren't a huge deal, but in a few spots the game wants you to use your skills to solve a few things, like charging a generator with the thunder spell, or lighting a platform's lamp with fire to make it move. It's a small thing, but it does add to the sense of adventure. Anyway, lots of stuff happens. Your buddy Riku turns out to be an asshole and steals your Keyblade. Kairi is a vegetable. Sora gives up his heart, so she's not a vegetable. He immediately is resurrected because, well, I guess they didn't have anything else for the story after that. And the real villain is revealed to be manipulating Riku. Honestly, the story is pretty cheesy and cliché. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. Considering the plot gets really convoluted shortly after this first entry, this title has a nice, concise plot. And the goofy plot helps keep it lighthearted. After all, it's a Disney game, and the upbeat, energetic style of the story and simple good versus evil plot fits. On a side note, I have to comment on the Theater Mode DLC. The other games have this mode by default, but here, it's a whopping 10GB download. And it's because instead of just loading the scene data from the game itself, it uses pre-rendered versions of the cutscenes, and it is really, really noticeable. While not all of them look terrible, it feels like there's a constant frame rate drop on some of them, and you can see artifacts from the rendering process. Obviously, I can't show it quite as clearly due to my equipment and such, but it was really noticeable on my TV. It's also disappointing that it only has one version of the cutscenes, such as only the version of the cutscene if you win against Cloud during your first encounter. The sound quality is also really bad in some of them. It seems like they may have used the Japanese versions of certain cutscenes, as the fish faces are noticeably more off-sync than usual, but maybe that's just me. I know that's mostly nitpicking, but it's still disappointing. And yes, I did use much of it for the footage in this review because I'm lazy, and I didn't feel like replaying the game just for the cutscenes. My final runtime for this game was around 25 hours, but that doesn't include all the side content. I sealed all but one world, got all the Dalmatians, and defeated only the bonus boss Phantom at the Neverland Clock Tower, which is pretty reasonable for the game's length. Obviously, there's plenty of additional content that I haven't done, but I'm also trying to clear this bundle before I wind up being an old geezer. Still, I'm pretty confident in my thoughts on the game. It holds up pretty well, despite a bit of jank and roughness here and there, and the strangely high difficulty in a couple spots during the main story. It's still filled to the brim with the wonderful charm that I loved back in the day, and the graphical upgrades and performance boosts, while not overly remarkable, are still very welcome. And of course, that wonderful soundtrack! I'm glad I was able to still enjoy the game overall, and I do recommend playing it, even if I wouldn't exactly recommend buying the bundle just for it. Luckily, there's plenty more in the bundle for me to talk about in the future. I think the game's greatest strength is described with that theme song, simple and clean. It clearly knows exactly what it wanted to be, and it embraced that. So yeah, I think Kingdom Hearts is still worthy of the hype it had back in 2002, and I'm glad I can say that. Wait, isn't the whole thing with the genie a gigantic plot hole? Couldn't Aladdin have passed off the lamp to Sora, Donald, and Goofy so they could make 9 more wishes, and then given it back to Aladdin to free the genie? Thank you guys so much for watching. Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. I don't have a lot of related videos for this one, but maybe check out my Final Fantasy VII playthrough? Or perhaps you want something more review-related, in which case, you can check out my last review, which was of the long-awaited Devil May Cry 5.